Hello, welcome to our little 1 hour session on autism and school uniform. I'm just going to share my screen and then we'll get going. There we go. Brilliant. So my name is Sarah Loveridge. I've been working with Reachout ASC for a little while now. And before that, I was working as a primary school teacher in a mainstream school in central Manchester. So I know quite a bit about school uniform in a mainstream school, and I'm currently completing my master's at Sheffield Hallam in autism, and my dissertation is going to be around autism and school uniform and the sensory impact of that. So it's something that really interests me, and hopefully you'll find it interesting as we go along as well. So we're going to be looking at autism and neurodiversity, the specifics of the sensory side of autism, because that has a real impact on autistic children's perception of school uniform, and then the impact that school uniform can have on autistic children. Now, obviously, we don't have very much time. We want to leave time for some questions as well. So it'll be a bit of a whistle-stop tour. We'll cover as much as we can. And yeah, hopefully it's just a bit of food for thought to go away with. So starting with the basics, so we've all got the same kind of groundwork to begin from. What do we know about autism? So autism is a different way of thinking and processing the world and the way our senses take in information about the world. And I always think that that's a really key thing. When we understand how autistic children process the world from a sensory point of view, that really helps us to understand some of the behaviours that we're seeing, some of their responses to situations, often really, really impacted by our environment and how our senses are perceiving that. So yeah, obviously we're going to focus on that a lot as we go through today. Autistic people might also process internal thoughts and sensations in a different way. Sometimes we can explain that, sometimes we can't. Whether we're autistic or not, it can be really difficult to try and get other people to understand how we're feeling or what we're thinking. And sometimes we don't even understand that ourselves, do we? So it's really helpful as we go through to remember that autistic people have those processing difficulties, and a lot of us have processing struggles as well, and hopefully that will help us to understand a little bit more. So language matters. As we go through, you might have noticed already that I've been referring to the children as autistic children rather than children with autism. The autistic community at the moment are kind of in general saying that they prefer autistic person. I heard someone describe it once as person with autism, makes it sound as if it's a person with a bag that they can pick up and put down, and you can't do that with autism. It's a lifelong thing, and it's really intrinsic to a person's sense of identity and personality. So yeah, autistic person kind of describes the whole person there. We try to stay away from ASD, as that uses disorder, which obviously is very medicalized and makes autism sound like a problem that needs to be fixed or medicated in some way. So we lean more towards autism spectrum condition, although condition also has some negative connotations attached. So yeah, autistic person, just referring to autism, is kind of what I'll be doing as we go through. We're going to be looking briefly at the 4 areas of autism. Communication, a lot of children find communication difficult. We'll have a little look at the double empathy theory in a moment, but some autistic children are very, very verbal and able to explain all of the thoughts in their head. They're able to chatter on and on and on. They might talk very specifically about their special interests. They might really dominate conversations, or they might be very withdrawn. They might be very quiet. They might be pre-verbal or non-verbal. They might be, I might find it especially difficult to communicate with other children who aren't autistic. There's a whole range, and you'll notice that as we go through. If you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. They all have different traits, they all have different personalities, they all have different characteristics, they are different people. So whilst I'll try and give an overview of what autism might look like, it might look very different from person to person. It will look very different from person to person. Social interaction is often the big thing in school. A lot of autistic children find it difficult to interact with non-autistic children in a positive way. Often that's to do with misunderstanding and miscommunication, which again, I'll come to a little bit later. There's thinking differences. we often think of autistic people as being very rigid and, they like maths and science and nothing else. And they're very, very set to their plan. A lot of autistic people are very, very creative, very good at thinking outside of the box, coming around things from a different perspective, which obviously is really useful when we're thinking about problem solving, when we are considering different alternatives to an idea. And they often have, it often seems very clear to them, well, why wouldn't we do it this way? This makes so much sense to me. So yeah, there's often those thinking differences in there. And then, of course, sensory processing, which I will talk about as we go through in much more detail. Double empathy problem, which I've already mentioned briefly, is a theory that was kind of talked about by a few different people, but kind of solidified by Dr. Damien Milton, who says, whilst it's true that autistic people can struggle to process and understand the intentions of others within social interactions, when one listens to the accounts of autistic people, one could say such problems are in both directions. So basically what he's saying here is, we're not saying that there's a deficit in communication with autistic people. It's not that they can't communicate or they can't have positive interactions. The problem often comes when we're trying to get an autistic person to interact positively with a non-autistic person. And often you might see this in your schools. Non-autistic people and non-autistic people communicate very well together. Autistic children and autistic children communicate very well together. The problem comes when they're trying to cross that divide and cross that bridge. Often it's just a case of miscommunication rather than a lack of communication or a deficit in communication. And when we understand that there's a miscommunication, surely we can see that that goes both ways. So yes, we need to teach autistic children, this is how you can interact positively with other people. Here are some strategies to help you interact in society. We also need to send that the other way and say to our non-autistic children, okay, there's obviously a bit of miscommunication going on here. Here's how you can support your autistic friend. Here's how you can adapt your communication and your expectations of social interactions to support autistic people as well. It has to go both ways. So often with autistic children who are struggling with the sensory side of a situation, there's some behavior that comes out. For some children, they have what's referred to as meltdowns. So that's kind of the expressive behavior, the explosive behavior, the visible behavior is very obvious. And for some other children, they have more of a shutdown where they basically become very withdrawn, very within themselves. They might refuse to move and become very, very still. They might look past you or refuse to talk to you. All of that is visible behavior. Obviously, that's negative visible behavior. This iceberg model could also be used with positive behavior, which helps us define regulation strategies. But thinking about that negative behavior, what we really try to do and facilitate at Reachout is looking underneath the behavior. So we use this iceberg model, excuse me, to look at, okay, the visible behavior is what we're seeing. We see the tables flipping, we see the children sitting, completely refusing to talk to anybody. That's what we can see. Why is that behavior there? What's going on underneath? What might be impacting that? And there's all kinds of things to do with stress, to do with time, demands that we might be putting on them, to do with difficulties interacting with other people or stress around that, illness, uncertainty, all of that kind of thing. And obviously, as we go through today, we're going to really look at how the sensory impact underneath the surface might be impacting that visible behavior. There's a blog on our website which talks about why does my child just melt down out of nowhere? And I'm putting that in air brackets because, or air quotations, because meltdowns very, very, very rarely, I would probably say never, come from nowhere. It's usually a case of it's the straw that broke the camel's back, and there's little things that have been building up to suddenly create this meltdown or this shutdown that you think, whoa, where's that come from? And it's actually because there's been a drip, 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 drip of things building up that then come out. A bit like a Coke bottle, it gets shaken up and shaken up and shaken up, and then all of a sudden the lid comes off and the emotions go everywhere. So when we think about, okay, what's underneath the behavior, it doesn't excuse the behavior, but it does help to explain it. So, okay, you shouldn't have thrown that pencil, but I think I can understand why you might have done. Here's something we can put in place to help you out with that. So this iceberg model I'll refer to as we go through in terms of the sensory impact of school uniform, and that hopefully will help us to understand why some of these behaviours might be happening and how that might be linked to what they're wearing in school. So I've talked a bit about what might be under the surface in terms of sensory and social issues. Obviously, there's things that we might put on them as well. Verbal demands, if we're not giving them any sort of visual cues to help them. Sensory demands, oh, just get over it, you'll be fine, everyone else can manage. It's really uncomfortable. Time pressure, transition, all of those kind of things might be things that we're adding to that iceberg and piling up on top of them. So maybe, again, if we can spot what some of those are, we can release some of that pressure for them. So sensory processing, we know that there are 5 senses. Hopefully we all know that. We've got smell, sight, hearing, taste and touch. There are also 3 other senses which we often don't talk about but are really, really important. So vestibular, you can see there the little person falling over. That's often to do with your balance. So to do with your inner ear. If you've ever felt a little bit tipsy, or if you've been on a roundabout and spun round and round and round and round and round, and then you get off, your vestibular system is going to be a little bit wonky and you're going to feel a bit like it's harder to balance. If you've ever had vertigo, then it feels horrendous, doesn't it? It's hard to stand at the top of the stairs. You're not sure whether you should be driving because you're struggling to balance. For some autistic children, that's their lived experience every single day. And so when they walk down the corridor and perhaps stagger a little bit, it might not be that they're being silly or trying to bump into somebody. They might have an issue with their vestibular system there. Interoception is your feeling of your internal senses. So that's your body giving you cues about things. Are you hungry? Do you need the toilet? Are you too hot or too cold? And all of those kind of things are wrapped up with emotions as well, is to do with your interoception. And if that's slightly off, then maybe you suddenly need the toilet right now because your body's not giving you the cue that you might need it in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. You might see children running around outside in shorts and sandals in the snow because it's sunny, and their body doesn't feel the cold in the same way. So they see the sunshine and think, oh, it's sunny. Sunny equals hot, therefore I'm going to wear my shorts. And they're not getting those regulation cues from their body that actually they might need to cover up a little bit more because they're too cold. I could go on for ages about interoception. I would really recommend looking into it, especially if you've got a child who really struggles to explain their emotions, especially if they feel really big emotions but then say, oh, I don't know. Some children overeat because their body doesn't tell them that they're full. Other children undereat because their body doesn't tell them that they're hungry. For some children who are trying to explain how they feel, they've just got some kind of uncomfortable feeling in their stomach, which might be fear, might be anxiety, it might be excitement, it might be that they're really looking forward to something, it might be that they're hungry, it might be that they feel sick, it might be that they need to poo, it could be all kinds of things, and their body just gives them some kind of general sensation. So there's a lot of unpicking and detective work that we can do around interoception to help children understand their bodies a little bit better. And then proprioception is the feeling of your body in space. So that's to do with hand-eye coordination. That's to do with your body's awareness of where it is in space. So if you're a bit clumsy, if you're bumping into things, if you're struggling to regulate your spatial awareness around other people, it might be that they have some proprioceptive difficulties that need to be addressed. And obviously that is going to be impacted by school uniform, which is very much in your personal space, isn't it? Because it's literally on your body. With all of these things, it's not that children, oh, they've got proprioceptive difficulties, oh dear, full stop. That is not the case. We can support children with these difficulties. We can give them strategies to regulate. They can manage it for certain periods of time, and then maybe they can have time away from it. We can help them to develop their hand-eye coordination skills, their fine motor skills, their gross motor skills. It might need a bit of explicit teaching or a bit of extra intervention, but it's not that they're a lost cause and, oh, well, they're autistic and they've got interoceptive difficulties, and that's the end of it. We can definitely support them with the sensory side. So autism plus environment equals outcome. If you imagine that you're at a busy train station, there's lots of noise going on. There's a train that's just come in, so there's people coming out of there. You're trying to find your right train. You're in a foreign country, so you don't understand what any of the tannoy is saying. You don't understand what the screens are saying to you. You've got somebody pulling on your arm. You've got your husband going at you in your ear. Somebody comes along and tries to take your bag. You're not probably going to say, oh, thank you so much. Yes, please do take my bag to the train. You're going to say, get away from me. That is my bag. Your response is directly impacted by your stress in that environment, by your sensory overload in that environment, by your confusion, etc., etc., etc. And your response comes out as probably very defensive and cross. If you're somewhere with people that you know, you're not overwhelmed, you're not overloaded, you're really chill, maybe you're at a spa somewhere, somebody comes up and says, oh, madam, please may I take your bag? I'll just pop it in the locker over there. Yes, of course. Thank you so much for helping me. Your response is directly impacted by your environment, and the outcome is very, very different. When we're thinking about children in school, if they're constantly feeling a bit uncomfortable, overwhelmed, in pain by what they're wearing, that is going to have a direct impact on how short their temper is, how much patience they have with other people. Their responses are going to be impacted by that. Autism plus environment equals outcome. We can't get rid of the autism. That's part of them. It's intrinsic. We can change the environment. If we can change the environment, we can absolutely change that outcome for these children. It's also worth remembering that everyone's perception of the world is different. So we shouldn't be saying, it's not too noisy, you're fine, get over it. Oh, it's not too scratchy, everyone else manages, you're fine. Because how we feel things is very different to other people. Even if we're not autistic, some of us can wear quite scratchy woolen jumpers and it doesn't really bother us. For other people, that's really uncomfortable and we're going to have to put something underneath or decide not to wear the jumper at all. Our perception and our background and context has a direct impact on how we view the world around us. And if we're not autistic, then we are not seeing the world from an autistic point of view. Therefore, we cannot understand it in the same way that they are, which is why, as much as possible at Reachout, we try to include the child's voice, the parent's voice in our understanding of the autistic worldview. So, sensory-wise, we've got this range of capable functioning. We could be on very different ends of the spectrum, and that will change from day to day, perhaps. That will also obviously be very different from person to person. So even from a non-autistic point of view, if you go on a roller coaster, some people love that, no problems at all. Other people throw up immediately as soon as they get off. Very different ranges of functioning there. For autistic children, they are either over-responsive and hypersensitive to stimuli. So everything is too noisy, everything is too itchy. They might find it really difficult when people are close to them because they're very sensitive to that. And so they're going to be trying to avoid that sensory input. They might be running out of the room, hands on ears, ear defenders on, trying to take bits of clothing off. On the other side, we have non or under responsive children who are hyposensitive to that sensory input, and they're going to be sensory seeking. So their body's not giving them as much information. They're going to be shuffling around on their chair because it feels like their bum's gone to sleep. They might be getting up to grab a pencil sharpener every 5 minutes because actually they just want a bit of movement in their legs. Maybe they're throwers, so they're throwing things in the classroom. That might be a sign that actually it feels like their shoulders are going to sleep and they just need to wake up their body a little bit more. So for those children, they're trying to stay alert because we don't want to be caught sleeping if there's danger around. So our bodies are telling us we need to be alert, we need to be awake. Therefore, you need to keep moving so that you're ready. A lot of autistic children spend most of their time on high alert because these sensory environments, whether they are over-responsive or under-responsive, these sensory environments are difficult for them, and therefore they're on high alert. They're ready to react to that danger if they need to. So just have a think. I'll give you 1 minute. How many different items of school uniform can you think of? So feel free to write them down if you want to. That'll help you remember. You can put them in the chat, or we could unmute and say it. And I won't record this little bit just in case you're worried about getting caught on camera. So just have a little think for 1 minute. How many different items of school uniform can you think of? Off you go. Okay, I got about 17 things there. That is a lot of different items of school uniform. And some of them are very uncomfortable, especially if you're thinking about going swimming and you've got swimming hats to put on, or you've got special football trainers that you have to wear, or we even had kind of all these kind of PE knickers that we were meant to put on underneath our netball skirts. Very uncomfortable. And often there's a lot of transition, isn't there, in terms of getting changed for PE and then back into your uniform. And we always had about 2 minutes to get changed and then run across to get to our next maths lesson or whatever. So there's lots going on there, isn't there, just in terms of the amount of school uniform that children are expected to get used to and deal with. So when we're thinking about sensory needs in terms of school uniform, it can be very uncomfortable and painful for children. Now, often if they're saying, I don't want to wear this, we think, oh, they're just trying to be a bit difficult. Everyone else can manage it. Just get over it. For some children, that can be very, very painful, especially if we're thinking about that range of capable functioning. For some children, it is actually, if they are over responsive to sensory stimuli, then something that's a little bit scratchy for somebody else might be very, very, very scratchy for them. Thinking about labels in the back of your t-shirts or whatever you're wearing, that can be very uncomfortable if it's just niggling a little bit. Imagine if you're really over responsive to that stimuli, to that stimulus. That's going to be very distracting throughout the day, isn't it, at worst, and it can be very painful. It can be distracting at best, painful at worst. Bright colours can be overwhelming, especially if you think about school uniform in primary schools. There's a lot of bright colours, aren't there? Lots of bright greens, bright reds, lots of white. Can be very bright as well, can't it? Often for secondary schools, the colours are a bit more muted. We had a lovely maroon colour. I know there's a lot of secondary schools that have black or dark blue, which can be a little bit better. But yeah, and even just keeping in mind about the bright colours, what kind of sensory input might that be for somebody who sees colours very brightly? A lot of schools are getting better now at muting the rooms, so they're a lot more, there's like Hessian boards and a lot more neutral colours. But thinking about school uniform colours as well might be helpful. Skin sensitivity, so I've talked about this a little bit already. It might be that, you know, we often think of scratchy jumpers. I've mentioned that quite a bit. It can also be trousers if they're too tight, or if they're having to wear shirts that have been freshly ironed and they're very starchy or very stiff. That can be uncomfortable. I know quite a few autistic children who their parents will basically run their school uniform through the wash several times before they wear it for the first time, which makes it look like it's been really used, but actually it's just because it needs to be more comfortable for them. So they've run it through the wash several times, first of all. Sizing. A lot of autistic children want to wear baggier clothes, so they might get a size up of the shirt or t-shirt or trousers that they need to wear, so that it's not so close to their skin and it's not as tight. That can help. For a lot of children, they find shoes really uncomfortable, like their feet are being trapped. I heard somebody describe trousers as leg prisons because they were just so uncomfortable, and again, feeling trapped. They would wear shorts all the time at home, baggy shorts, and then they were having to wear these trousers. And then getting changed. If you're struggling with your proprioceptive skills, your fine motor and your gross motor, then getting dressed and undressed by yourself is going to be difficult. Now, obviously in primary school, there's often a lot of help for that. Although still there's 30 kids in a class. So if you've got more than one child who needs help, then it's difficult, isn't it, to get around everybody. So often we then get frustrated. Oh, come on, you need to learn how to do it. Why are your parents not teaching you how to do it? Maybe they are. And for these children, it's going to be extra difficult for them. And then for a lot of children, they just think, well, it's so hard, I'm not going to bother. Everyone else finds it so easy. Why should I sit here and struggle? So the proprioceptive difficulties around getting changed are a really big thing. For a bit more information, you can have a look at the blog that I've linked at the bottom there. That's not to do with school uniform in particular, it's to do with general autism and buying and wearing clothes, and it's from an autistic perspective and some of the things that they think through when they're trying to shop for their clothes. So it just helps add a bit of insight, and also is a reminder that for these children we might force them to wear school uniform for all of their school life. They're still going to have these difficulties. They're still going to have to dress themselves at other times in life. So we want to give them the strategies to figure out what is comfortable for them, how they can make their own personal adaptations to their clothing so that life feels more manageable for them. Now, the next few slides are influenced heavily by Ruth. She is our sensory trained occupational therapist, and she is excellent. And obviously I emailed her to say any top tips on how to support autistic children when wearing school uniform, because she's sensory trained. She does this for a living 24/7. Very, very clever lady. And yeah, so the next few slides are information from here, and I think it's really, really useful what she says in terms of understanding what to be aware of, and then also having a look at adaptations that we can make to help those children. So she says, the big thing to know about clothing from a sensory point of view is that light touch and firm touch travel different neural pathways to the brain. So it is actually, again, we're reinforcing that idea that it's a neurological difference. It is, we talk about neurodiversity, we talk about neurodivergence. It is that difference in the brain. It's not just that kids are being awkward or trying to make things difficult for us and for everybody else. It's biologically different for them. Their feeling of it is very, very different. So light touch travels quickly, warns of danger, and gives little information about location, shape, etc. So it's basically a warning system. If you think about a spider climbing up your leg, you don't need to know exactly where it is, how many legs it's got, or how heavy it is. You need to know there's something on my leg that I don't want to be there, and you're going to knock it off quickly. So that light touch is important, isn't it? Because it warns us of danger. There's something there that shouldn't be. It's creeping up, and I'm going to get rid of it before it gets somewhere important. So that light touch is that warning system that something is wrong. So obviously, if that light touch is coming from a t-shirt, then you're going to be spending your whole day on edge, feeling like there's some danger around because there's something on your skin and you can't get rid of it, and you're trying to knock it off and it's still there. Imagine you've got a mosquito when you're lying in bed and you're trying to get rid of it, and you can feel it on your face and you're flapping it away. Oh, horrible feeling. Firm touch, on the other hand, travels more slowly to the brain and carries more location and texture, etc. So it gives you more information. It's more calming. Think of a nice big bear hug or feeling around in a bag for something. You need to know exactly what you're touching and where it is, and be calm and focused enough to process the information. So that firm touch can be very calming. If you think about weighted blankets or weighted items, a lot of children like those. If you've ever been to the spa for a massage, they'll ask you what kind of firmness you want with your massage, and it can be very, very soothing to get that really deep, firm touch when you're getting a massage to just kind of really relax you. So when we're applying that to school uniform, think about things that are brushing lightly against the skin. Labels, stiff fabrics, buttons, and zips might trigger that defensive response if we don't understand or process them in the way that they are intended. This can leave the person in a permanent state of high adrenaline. So they're going to be uncomfortable, they're going to be on high alert all day. That is not a good environment for somebody to then be listening really carefully to what's going on at the front of class, or talking to somebody next to them about their work, because they're going to be very focused on what's going on and their body is already in that state of high adrenaline. So it's going to only take a small thing to then trigger that meltdown or shutdown. Remember, it's like the straw that broke the camel's back, or the Coke bottle that's getting shaken up constantly just because of what they're wearing. The other thing to bear in mind, Ruth says, is that fiddly fastenings require coordination of both hands together, which is often tricky for autistic kids. Tactile discrimination can prove difficult, so understanding when the button is through the buttonhole, when the zip toggle is firmly in, ready to be zipped up. And adaptations that we often use, like Velcro, because that's easier than tying your laces if you've got proprioceptive difficulties, can often feel very stiff and scratchy. So again, I know some parents who have had to sit there and do the Velcro back and forth just to loosen it up a little bit, so that it's not so stiff and scratchy. But if that's on a shoe, it's a little bit easier. If it's on something that's going to be touching you, then that can be really uncomfortable. So Ruth says, what can help? Tight-fitting, stretchy fabric with no seams or fastenings can provide calming, firm touch. So like the little boy's got there, he's got a Lycra base layer. So some children put this Lycra top on underneath their t-shirt or their shirt. So actually the shirt isn't so close to the skin. Maybe they've put Lycra leggings on, so they're not feeling the stiff fabric of their trousers. They're feeling the tight-fitting Lycra. Obviously, that's easier to do in winter than in summer. So in summer, often some looser fit, soft fabrics can avoid some of that touch information. So again, like I've already said, some children wear baggier clothes so that that fabric isn't so close to their skin all the time. Putting heavy things in the pockets can counteract those light touch sensations through firmer touch. So if we're thinking about weighted blankets and things like that, it's difficult for children to carry that around with them all day. It's probably not very practical. What they could do, especially if they're in secondary school with blazers, is they could put something heavy in their pocket so it just pulls the blazer down and they feel like they've got that nice firm touch going down on their shoulders, which can be really soothing for them. Maybe you're thinking, well, why do I need to change things? You know, they do just need to get over it. It's always been this way, therefore we're going to carry on this way. Who am I to change everything that's going on in school, especially in terms of school uniform? You know, we can't radically change the school system. And you're right, we can't radically change it, but we can make reasonable adjustments. And in fact, we should make reasonable adjustments. So the Equality Act in 2010 and the Children and Families Act in 2014 say that this duty is anticipatory. It requires thought to be given in advance to what autistic children and young people might require and what adjustments might need to be made to prevent that disadvantage. Autism is classed as a special educational need, and we therefore need to make reasonable adjustments for it so that they can be integrated into our mainstream education. They should not be in pain all day just because that's how we've always done it in mainstream. We are required to make these reasonable adjustments for them. So thinking about the double empathy theory, we want to aim to understand, I've just put that at the side here because it says ways to help your children wear school uniform. Top tips to help your child mask and meltdown every day. We don't want them to just be getting through or coping. And that's why a lot of parents end up with children literally exploding at the end of the day when you think, oh, they've been fine all day, but maybe their school uniform has made them so uncomfortable that the Coke bottle has been shaken and shaken and shaken and shaken, and then they've exploded at the end of the day. So, you know, they're saying don't be forceful, but often, you know, if you're trying to force them into school uniform, you're going to have to, aren't you? So yeah, just beware. There are some helpful tips on here, but just be careful that we're not just forcing children to fit in just for the sake of it. So that's why I mentioned the double empathy theory again. We want to understand their point of view. Why, thinking about that iceberg model, why are they kicking off every time we ask them to get changed for PE? Why are they refusing to wear their blazer? Why are they refusing to wear their shoes in class? Why are they always kicking them off? Is there a reasonable adjustment that we can make? You know, when we're in the classroom, you can put your shoes at the side and just wear your socks, or not even wear your socks. Is that okay? Can we manage that? You know, then we can show the children we're working with them. Okay, you need to wear them to go outside because it's dirty. You don't need to wear them in the classroom. We can manage. Okay, I'm meeting you halfway. I'm compromising. I'm understanding where you're coming from. And those compromises need to be both ways. So we're asking children, you know, when you walk around school, you have to wear your blazer. That's school policy. When you're in the classroom, you can take it off. Are we able to make those compromises? Do they have to wear their blazer? Or could we get away with them not wearing their blazer if it's going to help them to engage with the school environment in a much more positive way without being in pain or discomfort? Is that actually going to help them to engage a lot more in their history, geography, maths lessons? Let's think about those compromises, those reasonable adjustments that we can make. Can it change for all children? If we have one child who's finding something really difficult, chances are there's other children who are also finding it difficult and not saying anything. So, you know, maybe that one thing that they have to wear top buttons is often the thing, isn't it? It makes it so tight around children's necks. And we always say, do your top button up, do your top button up, do your top button up. Often, if you push your tie high enough, you can't see whether the top button's done up anyway. So could we say it's fine to have your top button undone as long as your tie is close to the top of your shirt? Can we change that for all children? Because maybe they'll all engage better in lessons if they're feeling a bit more comfortable. It's very rare actually now that you have to go into a work environment and consistently wear a shirt with a top button done up. So many people work from home or are in jobs where they wear polo shirts or something that's a lot looser. So, you know, we have these antiquated rules where, we all go to work and we wear suit and tie. So we have to get children used to that. That's not the world we're living in anymore. And explain about different sensory needs to all children. So this is why Jimmy is taking his shoes and socks off. This is why we're not really forcing this child to wear the school plimsolls for PE. This is why we're letting Alex take her blazer off while she's in class. Things like that. And again, we've got that double empathy theory, helping non-autistic children to understand the world of autistic children and how their senses are perceiving that. Policy review. So this government document talking about school uniform. It's not mandatory to have school uniform. It is a recommendation, but it's not mandatory. So maybe we're going to have some schools that say, do you know what? We can go back to you wearing whatever you want to wear, whatever is most comfortable. Or at least saying, wear a white t-shirt and black trousers. And then you can choose what white t-shirt you're wearing and what black trousers you're wearing. Something that's not got a scratchy embroidered logo on it. Something that's not going to be really expensive as well. That's a whole different topic, isn't it? But there are bits that talk about reasonable adjustments in there, being willing to allow for some individual variations, engaging with parents, recognizing that their school community may change over time, and therefore your uniform policy surely must develop and change over time as well. When was the last time you reviewed your school policy for school uniform? Maybe it's time to have a little look at what adjustments you can make. Just having a look at some resources before we go on to some Q&A, which won't be recorded, so that you can feel free to ask whatever you want. Amazing things happen. Really useful video about autism. It's very positive. I share this with kids and parents all the time, so have a look at that one. This one is more to do with the sensory side of things. It's a little boy walking through a shopping mall, and things that we think are very, very normal from an autistic perspective can seem very overwhelming. So it just helps to understand that sensory perspective a little bit more. Oh, sorry, playing. Some useful books. Sensory circuits, definitely worth looking into, especially if you've got a child who's under responsive and moving around all the time, or if you've got a child who just needs a bit of that deep pressure, that calming. Have a look at that sensory circuits. It's a really useful pick up and go resource, so would definitely recommend having a look at that, by Jane Horwood. This is a really useful book for me doing my masters. Some of you might find it interesting as well. It talks about the history of uniform, why it's come in. Interestingly, uniform was first used to show who was elite, because the elite schools like Eton, etc., could afford uniform. They were the ones who would probably go into the jobs where they have to wear suit and tie, therefore we might as well get them used to it. It was to show that they were better than all the other schools. And then over time, other schools have started to adopt uniform because they want their children to look more smart, more presentable, to fit in and look more like the elite. If you think about America, it's a lot of the private schools that wear uniform, and a lot of the other schools, they can wear whatever they want. It was to do with this elite mentality. So it's strange, isn't it, that now everybody has to wear uniform all the time in a primary school. Yeah, really interesting to see where it's come from, and therefore it might help us to think, oh well, I could adjust that and adapt it in certain ways. These other books, Secret Life of Rose is really great. It's got a parent perspective as well as a kid's perspective. The Worry Workbook is really helpful, especially if you've got a child who you think uniform might be difficult for them. They can write in this book. That's always fun, isn't it? You can write in a book, and you can go through it with them, or you can leave them to go through it with their parents, but that's really helpful for them to figure out what might be causing some anxiety or discomfort. And then these books by Lynn, obviously, are amazing. I would definitely recommend them. There's one for secondary teachers, primary teachers, and then this one is to do with social stories. So we'll move on to question and answer. I'll stop the recording. If you do have any questions, please do drop us an email and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. We are often out of the office doing training or in schools working with kids and staff, so we might not get back to you straight away, but we will do our very best. Wonderful.